All right. Well, it's getting dark. I'm making spaghetti. Rocky is on the ground here beside me. I'm standing here by my stove making my spaghetti. Anyway, I'll tell you a story. This is my second attempt to tell this story because the first time my voice didn't get picked up by the microphone. I'm hoping it will get picked up this time. And I'll tell you the story anyway. This is a story, as I said, from when I was driving a taxi cab. One day I got called to pick up a man in Perth and to bring him to Kingston to a halfway house. The city of Kingston, which is about 50 miles southwest of Perth, is full of prisons and halfway houses. It's a huge prison city in Canada. Anyway, I got called to pick this guy up. I had to bring him to a halfway house in Kingston. He was a lifer, and he was on parole. He was convicted of first-degree murder. I didn't know that at the time. All I knew is I was delivering a man to a halfway house. Anyway, I picked this guy up, and when I picked him up, I could tell he'd been partying the night before. He was pretty well inebriated. He was still recovering, you know. Well, we get in the car, and we're driving to Kingston, and I should mention that there's no good road from Perth to Kingston. If you're in Perth and you got to go to Kingston, no matter what road you take, it's going to be narrow and hilly and windy, and it's just there's no good road to get from Perth to Kingston anyway. There isn't. The only way you could possibly have an easy trip to go from Perth to Kingston would be to drive to the city of Brockville, which is south of Perth, and then to get on the 401, which is a 4-lane highway, and you could take that west to Kingston. But other than that, you're going to have a rough trip. Well, we're on Highway 38, which runs from Charlotte Lake to Kingston. That's the route we took, up Highway 7 and then on the Highway 38. And Highway 7's not bad, but Highway 38's hellish. Anyway, I'm driving a great big white 1984 Buick LeSabre. The bench seat. He's riding up front with me on the passenger side, and he's passed out. He's gone to sleep, and we're driving to Kingston. Well, on a sharp curve on the road, I meet another car. Now, bear in mind, I'm driving a great big wide 4-door sedan. You know, the big old boats that we used to drive. And in those days, practically every car on the road was a great big wide 4-door sedan. Well, the guy I met was coming way too fast, and he was driving a car just as big and wide as my car, and we're on this narrow road on this curve. I'm going downhill, and he's coming uphill, and he's halfway across the center line into my lane when we met. Well, I cranked the wheel to the right, and I hit the shoulder, and of course when I did that, the passenger side of the car dropped, and we hit the gravel, and of course it made for a pretty rough ride. The car started to bounce and shake and everything, you know, because I hit the shoulder pretty hard. I was going a good speed when I hit it. I wasn't going as fast as the guy we met, but I was doing the speed limit anyway, and, you know, that was fast enough that it made for a rough ride. It jolted my passenger awake. Now, my passenger, he really didn't know what had happened. All he knew is that I'd just run the car off the road. And he was grumpy. He wasn't too impressed that I had done that. And so he told me very seriously. The first thing he did is he called me a bunch of names. There was a lot of profanity. And when he finished swearing at me, he said, "Now look here. You listen up." He said, "If you run this effing car off the road one more time between here and Kingston, you SOB." He said, "You miserable SOB, you do that one more time." And he said, "And I will murder you." And he said, "I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm telling you, I will literally murder you if you do that again." Well, luckily we had an uneventful trip back to Kingston. When I got back to Kingston, I dropped the guy off at the halfway house and I came back. Well, when I got back to Perth, I was telling my boss the story about what had happened on the highway and the guy threatening me. And my boss told me the story about this guy. He knew who the guy was. And he told me, he said, several years before that, this guy had been working on a construction site, and another man that was working on the same construction site had stolen some of his tools. Just decided he was going to take this man's tools. Anyway, the man found out who had stolen his tools, and he murdered the guy. And he was serving life. He was out on parole. After 25 years in Canada, you can apply for parole. And that's why he was staying at a halfway house. He'd just gotten out on parole, and I guess he was on some sort of an absence pass or something for the weekend or whatever when he was in Perth. But anyway, he was out on parole. He was in for first-degree murder because he had murdered this man that had stolen his tools. So that's the story behind this guy. Anyway, the guy had told me, he said, you run the car off the road again, I'll effing murder you. And he said, do you understand? And I just said, yes, sir. That was it. Anyway, luckily we didn't have any more issues. But yeah, it was pretty frightening anyway. I'm pretty happy to get him out of my car. And I didn't even know the full story. I knew he was a prisoner. I knew that he was going to a halfway house, but I didn't know anything else about him at the time. But yeah, that's the story anyway. Just another one of my cab driving stories. We'll talk later.